Hello everyone and welcome back to another Dawn of War 3 video. This time I will be discussing choosing elites and doctrines in general for the 1v1 game of Dawn of War 3. Now, this is bearing in mind that Relic Entertainment themselves have said that they intend 3v3 specifically, and I guess somewhat to a lesser degree 2v2, to be the focused on modes for the multiplayer of this game. And I can vouch for 3v3 and 2v2 being very fun. You see bigger armies in general, more strategies are opened because the maps are bigger, etc, etc, and of course resource gain kind of increases and bigger elites come out to do crazier things. But in the 1v1 setting it is still a very interesting game, as it's typically a more aggressive matchup. It's you versus an opponent, it's your mistakes versus theirs. Whoever makes the less mistakes in general over the course of a match will often win, and those who make the coolest plays will also kind of have a better chance at winning. And so it's just a much more aggressive game. If you can seize an early lead, you can very quickly snowball into taking a lot of the map and then striking at key objectives whilst teching up in the background. And what does this translate to with elite choice, I guess, and doctrine choice? Well, it means you want to cater more towards the early game than you would if you were playing a 3v3 or 2v2 match. And just want a quick shout out to my amazing colour scheme. My assault terminators look pretty bad ass. But yeah, back on topic, elite choice. Now, as you'll be able to see here, I've chosen Kill Team Ironmore and Librarian Jonah Orion. So when I say that you want to cater towards the early game with your elite choice, really I'm saying 2 out of your 3 elites should be either cheap or mid-gamey elites, so in the range between 2 and 5 costing elites. So personally for Space Marines I've gone with the Kill Team simply because they give you access to a very early Flamer, which is very nice against Orcs and even against Eldar to a large degree, and even access to a very early source of anti-tank, the Missile Launcher, which actually allows you also to push against war towers, against generators, against resource nodes, etc, etc. It's just a ton of flexibility on top of the sheer power of the Vortex grenade itself. So on top of that, you've got immediately following Jonah Orion. Now the Librarian is not as bursty as the Eldar Farseer Maka, but he does have a lot more utility overall. The fact that he has, on top of a damaging nuke, a wall-like ability, it means he can block off the retreats of weakened squads, increasing your chances of getting wipes in the early game, which can really snowball into an advantage for you. And also his blind. This is so useful for protecting bad retreats, or just running him into the middle of your opponent's force and blinding everyone. The Emperor's Light is definitely a very diverse ability in terms of how you can choose to use it. And on top of that, you could choose any number of elites really. So if you wanted to go with Kill Team Ironmore and then a different elite instead of Jonah, you could go with Gabriel Angelo. He is well known for being very powerful. Essentially, if he hasn't been in a fight for a long time, he can have 4 sources of knockback by himself, which is insane. And on top of that, his critical hits, which also do minor knockback. You could also choose to go with Chaplain Diomedes, who has AoE buffs, so every time his critical strike happens, he gives everyone near him a shield and buffs everyone, and he can kind of speed up that process with his active ability of the Liturgies of Battle. So there's a lot of flexibility here if you want. You don't have to go with Jonah, you don't really have to go with Kill Team. You could go with Jonah as your earliest elite, and then Gabriel or something like that into, Terminators, Venerable Dreadnoughts, Assault Terminators, etc, etc. And yeah, if you're going to go so hard into the early game with these first 2 elites, then naturally you also want to cater a bit to those late game scenarios, as even though they are less likely to happen than in a 3v3, they do still happen. So you do want to cater towards that a little bit as well, which means, personally, I love Assault Terminators. The fact that they have an AoE stun, they're super tanky, they have great damage against everything, and they give my tacticals just a better ability. The frag grenade, over nothing before, prior to upgrading them through the arsenal and the flamer and plasma guns. This basically just further buffs my early game, and if we take a look at the doctrines, you can see that all my doctrines are aimed at improving units and abilities that I'm bound to use in the early game. So the Scout Strike, this allows scouts to do more damage than they otherwise would, and let's face it, scouts are not known for doing great damage really as a unit. They're more for the utility of having a blind, for having a camouflage unit, for having, you know, vision across the map, all of that good stuff. But with this doctrine, these scouts become much more capable at taking out lone workers very quickly, taking out sort of similar low tier weak health units, and yeah, overall this just helps your early game, particularly if you are going to go for the build which involves building scouts, putting an assault marine squad into your first drop pod, etc, etc, which I have used on this channel before. Another doctrine I've used is the Emperor's Influence, which reduces the cooldown of Plant the Standard. Now the Standard is a very useful ability in the early game because it can essentially increase your chances of winning a particularly important fight by just a ton, really. The fact that its various buffs as you go through the tech tiers improve, and the fact that this is a across the game kind of improvement to this ability to calling down the banner, allowing you to call it down more regularly than you otherwise would be able to without this doctrine, really can allow you to plant the standard multiple times in the early and mid game and just improve your overall fighting potential. Now this third doctrine is a bit of a kind of flex slot. I haven't really decided completely what I will most often go with in a 1v1, but the slow death, the buff to the tactical marines flamer, it's definitely not bad. The ability to immobilize vehicles is quite potent. Naturally this is better in 3v3s because immobilizing a titan, well, not a titan technically, immobilizing a knight of some sort of any of the race's kind of walkers, that's very powerful compared to immobilizing a tank, but even so, you know, buffing this ability is definitely no bad thing. So if we go across the races here, we'll be able to see that this is a recurring theme, this style of catering towards the early game with your elites and also with your doctrines. So my Orc 1v1 setup, I've got Stormboys once again. I do like having a 2-cost elite for the potential to either call them in early and snowball the early game if I absolutely have to, or if it's going a-okay fine and I don't feel the need, I can just save up for an even quicker Gorguts. So Stormboys themselves, they allow you to stun with their Suicide Stormboy and also jump around the map, and their melee damage is very respectable. And if you've played Orcs at all, you'll be very aware that melee units in general are super useful, particularly when they have some sort of extra mobility attached to them, as it allows them to quickly overcome the downside of a melee unit. That is, that they're not ranged and can't hit from afar. So these guys can quickly tie up Devastator squads, other Deathgun Looter squads, all of those heavy weapon units across the races, and also just the generic starter units. So these guys versus tacticals, they will wipe the floor with them. And these guys versus assault marines, even though assault marines are great, having 1500 health I do believe, Stormboys do beat them in damage, and so yeah, they are extremely powerful in the early game. On top of that, Gorguts is just, you know, fairly godly. His multiple sources of crowd control, on top of the fact that he has 5000 health as a single unit elite, that is pretty insane. He will be taking a lot of hits and not going down, in addition to his ability to spin the claw and protect all of your meta units from a lot of ranged fire when you need him to. And then, as you can see, 2 elites that cater towards the early and mid game, and 1 elite that caters to the slightly later game scenarios, the Mega Knobs. You could choose, what could you choose? You could choose the Death Dread, you could choose, let's have a look. You could choose the Death Dread if you wanted, you could go with an even more aggressive build with, there's a lot of really cheap elites for Orcs looking back on it. You could go with Westmacra instead of Gorguts, you could go with Death Dread, as I said, the Mad Dread instead of the Mega Knobs. There's a lot of flexibility across the races here, and if we look at the Doctrines, it kind of reinforces again the idea that you want to cater towards the early game and a little bit towards the late game. So here I've got the Tons of Bombs Doctrine. This allows my Shooter Boys to, when they're upgraded with Scrap, occasionally lob a stick bomb naturally without you having to micro. this doesn't get rid of your microball abilities, so essentially this just gives your shooter boys, once upgraded with scrap, a free damage and I guess crowd control upgrade, which is pretty nice. So most orc builds will eventually end up generating a couple, one or two, shooter boy squads, and so buffing them is definitely no bad thing. In the same vein, most orc builds also transition into nob squads and trucks with the reinforcement upgrade, so buffing those nobs so that they're even better than they already are, and let's face it, nobs are fairly beastly as they are, but with these doctrines they become even better. So this one, whenever you use the nob's taunt ability, this gives them a shield, and when it breaks it slows units nearby, which is pretty damn nice. And this one stuck in when nobs die, which is quite likely given that you're going to be charging them into the thickest of fights. When they die, they grant bonuses relating to damage, speed, and cooldown reductions, all that good stuff. These two combined basically mean that your nobs are going to be incredibly powerful, on top of being, you know, very good already. So, as you can see here, these doctrines just tie in with what a standard orc build might be in a 1v1 matchup. Boys into a forward base, into warg towers, into reinforced truck upgrade, into a couple of trucks, into nobs in the second escalation phase. That is a very standard orc build that personally I have found great success with, so if you want to take that, feel free. And in the same vein, once again with Eldar, Striking Scorpions, the option of having a very early elite and the sheer power of an extra squad early on in the game for early fights cannot be underestimated. And so, thus, a 2-cost elite. And after that, Farseer Maka. I have mentioned before on this channel, Farseer Maka's AoE damage combo is very powerful, very hard to react to, and actually, in my opinion, needs nerfing a little bit. At least in terms of, you know, she throws a spear, maybe there's a short cooldown before she can use the explosion, just to allow the opponent to react a bit better than currently. But yeah, as you can see, once again the theme is we're catering towards the early game with us just a quick bit of spice in the late game. So we've got 2 early elites with a lot of power between them, and then the Wraithlord. Instead of the Wraithlord, you could go for maybe the Autarch, the Warp Spiders. There's a lot of options, really. Personally, I've found Farseer Maka to be better than Jane Zar in terms of utility, but I've definitely used Jane Zar a fair bit in the betas, and she provides a lot of damage, and she's very good for escaping bad fights, so, you know, you could swap Farseer for Jane Zar, or you could swap Striking Scorpions for Farseer, and then Farseer for Jane Zar. Something like that would probably work fine. And as everyone knows, the Wraithlord is pretty damn cool, especially with this epic colour scheme that I've custom crafted and thrown together. Let's take a moment to admire his gorgeous form. And yeah, the Doctrines, as you can see, improved plasma grenades, and the Banshee Scream, and the Avenger Holofield. So this improves our Avengers, as does this, giving them the ability to go invisible on demand, which means that one of your most reliable early game units just became even better, you know, twofold. On top of this, you've got the Banshee Scream improvement, and this allows Banshees to both silence and blind targets when they charge. And this makes Banshees amazing as basically assassination squads against early game elites with not much health, as the silence ability removes the elite's ability to use their powerful abilities, allowing the Banshees to toe-to-toe do a lot of damage without being punished heavily for it. So yeah, as you can see, the Doctrines just improve our early game completely. Of course, if you don't like going for Banshees, you could get a Dark Reaper buff, you could get like a Shadow Spectre buff, I guess, or go into Rangers with your Doctrines. There's definitely scope for going quite flexible with this, and yeah, as I've already mentioned, you can swap out some of these for different ones. So there you go, guys. In a 1v1 setting, the game becomes so much more aggressive. People are desperately fighting for resources and the elite point generator. Not that that's really great to pick up early on, because it's just so darn expensive to make a generator for, but definitely the resource nodes on both sides of the map people will be fighting very aggressively for. And yeah, if you can improve your odds in the early game, then you have a better chance at fighting it out in the early game, getting an early win, snowballing from there with tech, with resources, with elites, and yeah, in general, improving your odds at winning. So I hope you found this useful. I will be doing a second video on Doctrine choices for the 3v3 and 2v2 team game of Dawn of War 3, as that's a very different game for sure. And yeah, more Dawn of War 3 coverage coming to this channel fairly soon. As always guys, thank you for watching. I do hope you found this useful, and more will be coming fairly shortly. So yeah, see ya.